Chapter 161. The Little Details. Dominic and Lucy went through the numbers for the proposal again, and then started in on the training and equipping a guard force portion of the proposal. Technically, that wasn't included in the requirements, but they were going to need it, and they couldn't rely on the royal guard to protect the entire estate. The princess would have her retinue with her, as she was still a royal, but their job was to protect her, not the house, the village, or the farms. But beyond that, Dominic wanted a proper military force in the estate so that they weren't one of the many villages forced to flee or die the moment that an enemy appeared. I should add another wall to the estate, or upgrade the existing one if there is one. It doesn't have to be excessive, but it should at least be defensible if the building wasn't built to repel attackers. He noted as they went through the list again. What do you mean, built to repel attackers? Amos asked. The manor at home has a stone ground floor. The actual building begins 3 meters off the ground. If the stairs are collapsed, the building becomes somewhat defensible, as anyone trying to get in has to scale the wall to get in one of the windows, or through the door, which is now 3 meters in the air and unable to be rammed. Dominic explained. Lucy nodded. That used to be a common construction technique. Then the stairs were slowly upgraded to narrow ramps, and the houses became more accessible, but narrow windows that double as archer slits on the main floor are still fashionable. I don't see any actual details about the state or design of the estate manor in the paperwork. Should we ask? Amos shook his head. No, I think that is part of the trial. Coming up with a plan for whatever you find when you get there is the point of the challenge. If they tell you exactly what you're getting, it makes it too easy. They made a point of saying that it is inhabitable, and that the interior was intact. But then they omitted the actual description of the manor? That can't be a coincidence. All right, we will assume that if it's not in the description, it doesn't exist or needs to be rebuilt. But Dominic can do that himself once he arrives. We just need to budget the time for the construction, as it can all be done with magic. Lucy agreed. But he will also need to upgrade that spell gem if he's going to make anything resembling a keep wall in a single pass. You can layer the walls to get what you need, but at level 1, the fieldstone wall gem is best used to make residential buildings, not fortifications. Amos explained. Dominic nodded. I can get it to level 8 easily enough. That should be sufficient to make usable fortifications. Right? Amos smiled. If you're willing to put that many resources into the spell, it will be no problem for you to fortify the manor in an afternoon. It wouldn't even be unreasonable to think that you could fortify the entire village in the matter of a week. A level 8 gem would also erect standard thickness home walls fast enough that you could build a house with a wave of your hand. If we had more architectural gems and magitech, you could do the whole village like that. But right now, the best bet would be to press clay sheets into corrugated copper roofing after someone installs the roof joists. It's labor-intensive, but you can get good copper out of the spell at level 3. It's even easier than steel because it's not an alloy. Oh, you could water down river clay and let it flow into a press, then lift the press and convert it, remove the sheet and dip it again. 3 people could make a whole stack of roofing in an afternoon. Copper roofing is fire-resistant, and with fieldstone walls, the village would hold up well to artillery. Oh, that's good. I will add it to the plan. A fieldstone wall for the village wouldn't be bad either. It would keep wildlife out. You never know if there will be goblins, magical beasts, or other threats outside the village. Farmers always get the shaft when it comes to these sorts of plans, but a bit of defended territory is better than none. Oh, we can add a retreat plan to bring the farmers and others into the manor if there is a large attack. Dominic added. That means you need a larger storehouse. Starvation is a very real danger if you've got the whole village locked into a single manor. Tutor Lucy reminded him. It would help if we had some sort of layout, but it does say that the village is separated from the manor house by half a kilometer and the ground is mildly sloping. So, it won't be possible to have everything protected, as you would with a keep that had the village build around it. That means we should station most of the guards in the village, with a token force and the royal guards living in the manor. That way, neither force is too far from where they will be needed. Not optimal for a major attack, but we also don't know where it will be. If it's somewhere inland, deep inside Signia, it's not an issue. but it could be in the reclaimed territories awarded during the armistice negotiations. So, there is a chance that everything in the area can be considered hostile. Dominic reasoned. Amos frowned. Aren't you overthinking it? I have been Baron for 30 years now, and I have never had to even consider most of this. Dominic laughed. It's a theoretical exercise to impress both the princess and the king with our capabilities, and convince them both to approve our marriage proposal. Whether it would realistically happen to us or not, we need to be prepared for everything so that the princess doesn't end up as a political prisoner. The engineer laughed. I have never had to fear that. My wife is much more fearsome than I am. But someone needs to do the hard parts of life, I suppose. Chapter 162. Anti-spying measures. By lunch, they had found solutions to all of the obvious, and some not-so-obvious, issues. Even Baron Amos was taking notes by the time that Tutor Lucy was finished her lesson on budgeting and operating a manor and estates. Dominic wrote out a fresh copy of the plan with none of the corrections or errors that the original had, while Lucy also wrote out a copy, though for what reason Dominic wasn't certain. Are you planning to get input from someone? He asked as she continued to write. The tutor shook her head, and a small smile added wrinkles to her face. No, I'm making up a new plan. One that's completely awful and inhumane to the residents. Leave it here on the table, and I am quite certain that by the time the reports are turned in, either spies for the royal family or one of the other competitors will have a copy. She replied, Oh, that is evil. I like it. Did it never occur to you to try to get an advantage from the ideas the others are coming up with? Amos asked. Dominic shook his head. The only one I think might come up with a better plan is Lord Thorvald, and I'm not certain that he's actually taking this process seriously. I have a suspicion that he's got a thing for Princess Josephine, and he's not actually trying to marry Princess Alexis. Lucy sipped her tea. What gives you that impression? His reaction when she slapped him. He struggles to tell the twins apart, but he was totally into it when he realized what one he was talking to. Dominic replied. The older pair looked at each other with amusement, then back at Dominic. You're sure that he's not just a masochist? He's a bit of a simpleton, Amos asked. Dominic shook his head. He's not dumb. He plays the buffoon to put people off guard. He thinks it's funny to get away with ridiculous behavior because of his reputation. He's actually the only one who noticed the little details during our meetings. Lucy frowned. If that's true, it could be problematic. The nobles who have mastered that level of subterfuge don't learn it for no reason. He's the third son of a duke in West Kyria. He's got power behind him, as long as he doesn't push things so far that his father disowns him. The Marquis is a strong contender just on his own skills. But I do get the feeling that the other Signia nobles were only considered as a show to make up numbers. A younger son of a baron? Or even the spineless son of Count Herthamia. Those aren't serious contenders for the princess hand. It's really a contest between the three of you, and I'm not sure that I understand why you were chosen. I get that you have some level of royal blood in you, so you're suitable for the lineage, but even your accomplishments as a gunsmith aren't enough to elevate your status to that level. No offense. Dominic shrugged. I have suspicions, but the walls have ears. Then he wrote the word Stantia Province on a spare bit of paper and let the other two read it, then burnt it with the create campfire spell. The tutor smiled as she realized what Dominic thought the reason was. But Baron Amos shook his head. That's a risky move, he said. Dominic nodded. It is, but I think that it's the most likely reason. Stantia Province was once southern wavemates. Sending Dominic back with Princess Alexis to rule a portion of the territory would give the king a way to show that he cared for the people of the region he annexed, without having to actually do anything for them. Amos looked at the uncommon, clay to steel made pistol still sitting on the table. I don't suppose you would sell me this one for gold? I've got plenty of that, he asked. Dominic nodded. Of course, they were made for just that reason. I've already given them to all of Princess Alexis' royal guards. Amos laughed. No wonder you're considered the fan favorite to win. The royal guard all seems convinced that you have a secret that will give you a last-minute push ahead of the competition. But if you've been arming the royal guards, it is hardly surprising that they have a better opinion of you. Dominic chuckled. Well, with what Tutor Lucy has taught me, plus my experience from the forge, I don't think that the guards in my hypothetical situation will be struggling to match up against any enemy that they face. Lucy shrugged. It's a compelling argument. Remember what happened in Scipia. The new king was a coward, but one of his dukes commanded enough military might to fend off an invasion, and then when he was snubbed in the post-war rewards, he married to become a prince of Flockwer. He came back with an invading army, and nobody raised a blade to resist. Amos tapped the table as he counted out gold to buy the pistol from Dominic. You have a point. Military potential is a major consideration. They already lost a number of top mines to other nations this year. Losing a top gunsmith and growing sorcerer is a recipe for disaster if he holds a grudge. There is no downside to showing him favor, even if he doesn't win. Dominic hadn't looked at it that way. If they valued his skills and his lineage, there was no downside to giving him false hope of advancement to keep him loyal to Signia. But Dominic got the feeling that this wasn't as false of an option as the Baron thought. If the courting process was a false hope for him, there would be better competition. Dominic finished the rewrite and put both the final copy and most of the initial drafts into his storage cube. He would deliver them personally, and then he wouldn't have to worry about any sort of false accusations about his plan. At most, he would only have to wait until tomorrow morning's briefing to make the delivery, which was still a full day early. If there was a trick to be played, it would most likely come in the last few hours before the meeting, when everyone would be nearing completion of their plans. Making accusations when your opponent still had an entire day to remake their plans would not be nearly as effective, and it would only warn them that someone in their staff was compromised. Chapter 163, Prince Kaizen. Pops returned before dinner and found Dominic working in his room, with documents left sitting on the table in the main room. He moved them to the back of the table and set an empty vase on them so that they didn't blow around when he opened the window later, and then called for Dominic as the maid came in with the dinner cart. Food is ready. Give me 5 minutes. I'm just finishing up a couple of rifles for the forge's supply here, and then I will be out. Pops chuckled. The boy was excused from all his duties for the duration of the courtship trials, but he was still turning out weapons for his work quota. Very dedicated. Dominic finished enchanting a pair of rifles for the forge, uncommon grade ogre hunting rifles using level 10 oil. Having a stockpile of them here would be good for the palace, in case someone damaged another rifle. But mostly, it helped Dominic feel grounded while his mind reeled from the new information that was finally sinking in. The maid uncovered the dishes, starting with a tomato soup and fresh bread, then both a steak and a lobster tail, a plate with very decorative vegetables, and one more dish that Dominic assumed was dessert left covered on the tray. I can't tell if we're being spoiled or about to be told bad news, Pops joked. As the forge master, he ate well, but both steak and lobster in one meal was rather extravagant, as both took careful preparation to not come out wrong. They weren't dishes that were easy to make for hundreds. The maid chuckled. They're being served throughout the whole wing of the palace. I don't know what the occasion is, but the kitchen has been working hard today. Well, at least it's not just us. Perhaps they made a breakthrough, and they're going to make an announcement tonight? You should probably get ready for an emergency meeting after dinner. Pops informed Dominic. That's not a bad idea. Worst case scenario, I'm just getting an extra shower for the day. The dessert was a decadent chocolate cake, and Pops snorted in amusement when he saw it. Oh, they 100% have bad news for us. No way does this not signal bad news. Dominic scooped up a bit of cake and shrugged. Well, at least the bad news came with cake this time. It came with an emergency deployment order and no dinner last time. Dominic showered and changed as soon as they finished eating, and came out of his room to see a pair of royal guards and a maid waiting for him. Advisor, there is a meeting, the maid informed him nervously. Of course, that was somewhat expected. Let's go. The walk through the halls was quiet, but they didn't lead Dominic to the princess suite. Instead, they led him to the throne room directly. The king was already seated on the throne, and one side of the room was lined with Dago's flags and dignitaries. That was not at all what Dominic was expecting when he was called. Perhaps this was the official armistice signing? He took his spot along the wall, but noticed that a pair of royal guards were stationed at his shoulders, as if already expecting trouble. Pops was right, this was definitely going to be bad news, and not a simple armistice signing. Dominic remained silent as the royals and nobles entered the throne room, with Princesses Alexis and Josephine standing in front of him, next to the red-carpeted walkway. Once everyone was in place, one final group from Dagos entered. A tall, dark-haired prince, accompanied by 4 nobles and 20 Dagos royal guards, strutted down the aisle as if this were their own palace. Signia, the prince announced with the smallest of nods in acknowledgement that he was facing the king. Prince Kaizen, I trust that you are prepared to sign the armistice. King Signia asked. I am, on 2 conditions. If you want my armies to cease their inexorable advance across your pathetic nation, you will expel every Wavemates refugee from your territory, and gift me 2 princesses to use as my personal slaves. The twins would be fine, he demanded. There were murmurs of discontent from the Signia side. Did this prince actually think that his side was winning the war? You think you are in a position to demand 2 of my daughters as slaves? Perhaps your losses have not been significant enough. The king asked sarcastically. Pathetic peasants and a traitor duke? Hardly a loss to the might of Dagos. 300,000 soldiers are prepared to cross the border tonight if you do not meet our demands. I see that you have not yet seen sense. You may return to your armies, Prince of Dagos. The prince smirked and turned his back on the king. Then, he drew his blade and lunged directly for Princess Alexis. A flick of his hand, and Dominic brought up an area barrier, while Princess Alexis smiled at the prince. Still too slow and too weak, just like your armies. Now run away, little boy. Let the adults take care of politics if you don't know your place. She taunted. The royal guard had rushed to surround the Dagos delegation, and everyone had weapons drawn. Enough! The Dagos delegation will leave unharmed, the king announced. See, even your king knows his nation won't survive insulting me. Best keep your bags packed, princess. It's a long trip to your new home. The royal guard parted as Prince Kaizen departed, followed by the dignitaries sent by Dagos, who were all entirely too smug for Dominic's liking. Dominic finally noticed that there were 2 hands on his shoulders, keeping him from moving forward. Surely, they hadn't expected him to actually let the Dagos scum take Princess Alexis if the king had allowed it? No, they hadn't expected him to let it pass. That's why there were 2 guards on him. Princess, should we return to battle? Or do we have duties here in the palace? Dominic asked. Alexis winked at him, and Josephine laughed quietly. Father was right. This isn't going to end without more bloodshed. Dagos aren't willing to accept that they've lost, even with so much territory in our hands. Alexis whispered. Chapter 164, Impasse. The king pounded his hand on the throne, bringing the room to silence as the doors closed behind the Dagos delegation. We have come to an impasse in the armistice negotiations. The demands that have been made are not acceptable by either side, and the representative of the royal family of Dagos is not convinced that they are actually going to lose the war. So, today we begin the offensive phase of the battle. The airships have been prepared, the mechanized cavalry is ready, and our battle mages have been positioned for the assault. Unit assignments for the royal family will be delivered by my personal staff tonight. The 6th prince and his unit will escort Prince Kaizen back across the border, as his safety was guaranteed under the terms of the ceasefire. The king explained. He stood and left the room, the signal for everyone else to break up and prepare. Dominic followed Princess Alexis back to her suite, where a royal advisor was waiting for them. Your Highness, this is for you, he declared, as he passed over the small note. Alexis took the note with her as she entered the suite, then waved her hand for everyone but Dominic to leave. Let's see how bad this is. We found out today that Dagos has an alliance with Skipple on their western border. The 2 nations have fielded an army of nearly 1 million men who are currently making their way across Dagos on the main roads. That will lead them near the staging point for the last attack at Staptentave. It is also the only route that their vehicles can take, as they are not built for cross-country travel. She explained, then opened the royal missive. Dearest daughter, the future king apparent of Dagos is serious about his demands. He will accept nothing less than the public humiliation of our family in return for the armistice. If this war ends any way except with their utter capitulation, I fear that your freedom cannot be guaranteed. As such, I have put the natural sons at your disposal, and you have free rein to plan your own battles. Accept no defeat, never surrender, or face a fate worse than death. Father, I knew that I should have killed him, Dominic muttered. Princess Alexis shook her head. And brought every border nation down upon us for killing an envoy under the flag of peace? No, it's better that you didn't. At least not today. Don't forget that Mitfield and West Kyria had nobles in the room for that meeting. But I have a plan. Do you have a way in your techno-magic knowledge to set up mobile artillery quickly, and lightweight enough that it won't overload a storage item? Give me a night, and I think that I can come up with something. Dominic agreed. Then we will leave at first light. The riflemen are already being prepared to move. Dominic nodded and prepared to return to his rooms. No, you're remaining here for the night. We're not having another incident like the assassination attempts. If you need tools, we will send someone to get them. Alexis ordered. I will need to make the launchers later, then. This suite isn't suitable for metalworking. But the idea I have is for shorter range artillery. 1 to 200 meters maximum, but man-portable and quick loading. Dominic explained. And how did you come up with that so quickly? Dominic smiled. I didn't. It came up as an option earlier when we were thinking of ideas for another issue. Fireworks launcher tubes. Only, instead of fireworks, we put a fragmentation grenade with a fuse on the end. A mortar shell. It's shaped like an oval tackle ball, but with fins at the back to stabilize it. Drop it in the tube like a firework, but don't aim it straight up. Princess Alexis relaxed a little and smiled. And you can launch them across the city. The kids in the Noble District do it with fireworks every year. I suppose that it would be much more deadly with a grenade than a sparkler in the tube. The next thing that Dominic needed to do was modify and build a new version of the Create Munitions Magitech orb, one that would make the mortar rounds. They weren't that different from cannonballs, and they were much smaller, so it was only a small adaptation to the self-loading cannon orb. In under 2 hours, he had a new one made, and he had successfully created the first batch of mortar rounds, though he hadn't been able to test them. Are you sure that those will be deadly enough? Alexis asked. If they land on a city wall or within infantry, certainly. If they hit a house, it's less likely. What were you planning? Dominic asked. Hit-and-run cavalry rifleman tactics. If we take a few all-terrain trucks with the riflemen, we can get anywhere we need to be quickly. Leave the trucks further back, send the cavalry forward, bombard Dagos camps when they are settled in, and then retreat if possible. I want to inflict as many casualties on their infantry as possible so that there won't be enough men for them to continue their war effort. Dominic nodded. In that case, we will need a lot of the mortar launchers. I will try to get one made for everyone in the Natural Sons. Even 3 or 4 volleys from 500 cavalrymen will be enough to cause utter chaos in a camp. But I will warn you, these are not precisely aimed weapons. You pick a field to target and hope they land on it. Alexis nodded. We will take what we can get. The Natural Sons are competent riflemen. Even if the first strike isn't successful, they should still be able to inflict heavy casualties on the enemy. But we will be doing it deep within Dagos, so don't expect any sympathy from the locals. Dominic nodded. If we had more time, I would work on improved gear, but as it is, I will just grab every bit of spare tooling and parts for the weapons they have. I can make more along the way if necessary. You know, when we get back after the war, we are going to have a lot to answer for, right? Alexis asked, unsure if Dominic understood the many violations of the rules of war that a surprise mortar bombardment of sleeping troops entailed. In that case, we should likely leave the royal heraldry behind when we depart. Chapter 165. Departure. Dominic made 4 of the modified orbs before bed that night, and then prepared to leave first thing in the morning. Should we try to come up with some sort of cover for our departure? Princess Alexis asked nervously as she packed her supplies into her storage rings. Not a bad idea. The king knows, but nobody else does. I will leave a note. Dominic agreed. Pops, given the current situation, and the demands of the Dago's prince, which will surely be the gossip of the palace by the time that you receive this, I have decided to elope with the princess. Please inform her father that I would ask for his forgiveness when you see him. Or don't. That's probably safer. Dominic. Then he wrote Pops on the outside and sealed it with his thumb pressed in hot wax. Alexis donned the same disguise that she had the last time that they snuck out, and gave Colonel Wilkes an affectionate thump on the armor as she left her suite. The royal guard wouldn't be with them this time, as it would draw too much attention, both leaving the palace and when Dago citizens saw them in combat. The laws of both nations required that the royal guard not fight while out of uniform, so they simply couldn't accompany the princess without causing a spectacle. They made it to the staging area, where the princess climbed into a supply wagon, and Dominic took a seat next to her. The guards will go out training in 5 minutes, with Ella from my royal guard retinue dressed in my armor. That should be enough to distract any spies, as long as her visor isn't flipped up during training. One day to get out of town is all that we can ask for before Dagos will have spies hunting for me and Josephine. Alexis explained. The convoy started moving, and Dominic settled in for the trip. He wouldn't be able to work until they were out of the city, or the smoke from the forge and the sound of hammering would give them away. But the Natural Sons Regiment would be the primary suspect in Princess Alexis' disappearance the moment that she was discovered to be missing. They were assigned to her, and even if she hadn't officially left with them on this mission, someone would be sure to come looking. The convoy moved smoothly out of the city, and then northwest along the dirt roads between fields and farms, headed directly toward the border, as would be expected of a military deployment. We've got a full morning of travel, and then we will be in the thick woods on the other side of Eremos village. From there, we can strip the insignia and move like a private military force belonging to one of the nobles. It's normal for them not to fly banners out of combat, so nobody should question it too deeply. The driver explained, leaning toward the window, so Dominic could hear him. Got it. Let me know when you change. The princess surely has something prepared, but I was intending to be somewhat flamboyant. Every good mercenary force needs a visible employer. I've got enough fancy clothing to pull it off for at least a few days until we reach the border. Dominic explained. Just keep your hat on. The driver agreed. Nobody even looked up as another convoy of Signia soldiers moved back toward the border. News was already spreading that Dagos had refused the terms of the armistice, and the war was likely to begin again any day. Whether that meant that Dagos would strike again with underhanded tactics like the goblin invasions, nobody knew. As they passed Eremos village, the driver knocked on the carriage roof to let Dominic know that something was wrong. Do you need me to come up? He asked. And put on your best act. The driver agreed. Dominic put on one of the flat caps he had gotten with his new rakish playboy fashion, and added a pair of crystal-lensed goggles, as was fashionable in the city. Then he climbed out onto the running boards and up beside the driver. Who is leading this force? A deep voice was shouting from the front. I am. Why are you blocking our way? Dominic shouted back. A knock at the window behind the driver caught his attention, and Dominic took a rolled scroll from Alexis. A cursory glance showed that they were deployment orders, and she had filled in the Earl of Totbu as the unit's commander. The Earl of Totbu was long dead, with no heirs that Dominic knew of. But most would just assume that the title had been given to someone else as a reward for service. Who are you, then? The captain of the team blocking the road demanded. Earl Nick of Totbu. I have deployment orders from His Majesty. Now, why are you blocking my unit? Dominic demanded, holding up the scroll with the royal seal visible. Then he rolled it before the captain would have time to fully read anything. Our apologies, Earl Totbu. We have been alerted that a member of the royal family is missing, and we have been ordered to secure all roadways. The captain explained. Understandable. Missing children are always an urgent matter. However, there are none in my convoy, and we are urgently needed at the front. Dominic replied. Of course, my lord. However, we do need to search the carriages. Dominic frowned. Are you questioning my word? Or my honor? Of course not, my lord. Please, proceed. We will mark the search as performed by yourself personally. Dominic nodded and gestured for the cavalry to move, even if they had to run over the blockade soldiers. 30 minutes later, they were sure that the area was abandoned enough to take down all their heraldry, and the Royal Army unit became a personal cavalry force of the Earl of Totbu. Then Princess Alexis came out with her hair dyed black and a much less ornate set of armor on. Her cloak was light, suitable for the weather, but hooded to keep her face out of the sun. That made her look like one of the guards, or perhaps a ranking servant of the Earl. Perhaps even the Countess. She was the only woman in the procession, as while the recruitment was open to everyone, the Natural Children's Initiative had only attracted younger sons, earning it the moniker, the Natural Sons Regiment. Keep going. Let's get as far as possible toward the border before we have to stop. Dominic instructed. Chapter 166. Traveling Incognito. Well after dark, the convoy pulled to the side of the road in an open clearing, and Commander Dax came back to the truck Dominic and Alexis were riding in. My lady, we have an issue. Our cover requires that we operate as a unit under the command of a lord. But nobody thought about where you would fit into that cover. We just assumed that someone else had, and it slipped our mind. He whispered. Meaning, you will either have to sleep in the transport carriage with our supposed Earl, or we will have to explain to anyone who happens upon us why the Lord is sleeping in the dirt with the common soldiers. Dax mumbled. The road was a busy one, and they had only just managed to remove all their heraldry before the next group came down the road in the opposite direction, bringing farm supplies to market. Alexis smiled at the commander. Fear not, we can manage this level of disguise. Think of it as the Lord Sorcerer auditioning for his role as fiancé. Commander Dax choked on his next words, then stiffly saluted. Understood. I will leave you to your evening preparations. He closed the door of the passenger compartment, and Alexis laughed. This is destined to be an interesting trip. Either we come back victorious, or both of our reputations will be ruined, and we will be cast out of the social circles of the upper nobility entirely. She joked. Dominic chuckled. Well, if we are, I know a nice spot in the woods where we could move and nobody would ever know our names. The princess shook her head in dismay, then turned her back. Help me with this, would you? Noblewomen's clothing is not intended to be put on or removed by one person. Well, neither is armor. But we don't have any staff with us for that purpose on this outing. Dominic smiled as he undid the knot in her corset laces. You know, there is a method to this for commoner women without maids. If you take all this extra lacing, and instead of running it back up the row, you loop it around the front, you can tie yourself off and everything will stay tight. Normally, a commoner housewife would be wearing an apron all day, so the laces are covered. I learned all about it from my mother when I grabbed and untied the lace as a kid. But for the sake of appearances, it's better that I lace you up. We wouldn't want people thinking that my wife couldn't afford to be dressed properly. He joked. Once the lacing was loose, Dominic helped her out of the garment, then did his very best not to react as she let the dress fall, revealing her slip dress, which was simple cotton and easily removed without assistance. She held out her hand, and Dominic handed her the nightgown on the bench. Then, Alexis realized that it was Dominic in here with her, and not her dressing maids. Forget that you saw that. I'm quite certain that is not possible. However, I can refrain from mentioning it. Alexis rolled her eyes and turned him around before she removed the slip and lowered the nightgown over her head. Then she smirked at Dominic. Aren't you going to get ready for bed? She asked in a taunting voice. Dominic sat on the bench and stripped off his shirt, then began to unbutton his pants before Alexis turned away with flaming red cheeks. A pair of soft flannel pants replaced the day wear, and he was ready for sleep. I will fold this so it doesn't wrinkle. The back bench folds out into a bed, and I will get the blankets out from under it when I shift the seat. He offered. Yes, excellent. Thank you. Alexis stammered. Dominic made the bed, and Alexis motioned for him to take the back. If anyone breaks into the truck, put up a barrier and eliminate them with magic. My hair is dyed black, but if they get a good look at me, There is a good chance that someone will recognize me and report it back to their boss. She explained. Got it. Sleep was not an easy task that night. At least, for Dominic. Especially not as the sleeping position she had chosen made her the little spoon as he lay facing the door, so he could react to intruders. Princess Alexis was asleep within seconds of her head hitting the pillow, but Dominic was keenly aware of her sleeping next to him, and the journey to sleep seemed to take forever. So, when he woke up, it was almost a relief to know that he had actually managed to rest at some point. He carefully stepped over the princess and began to get dressed, putting on his armor, then reconsidering trying to fit clothes over chain mail so he could look more noble. He didn't have any fancy clothing fitted for that like most nobles would. Instead, he put on sorcerer robes with his chest plate over them and one of the ornate top hats that had been included in the purchase of formal clothing he made for the effort to court the princess. Paired with a set of goggles as a hatband, he made a perfectly disjointed image of a tech-obsessed noble mage. It would have to do. Then, he woke Alexis and got her fully dressed and armored. All right, we look like a proper earl and countess. Now, let's go see what the regiment has for breakfast and get on the road again. The answer was oatmeal and dried fruit. Not fancy, but filling. The regiment pushed hard through the day, as the trucks had Magitech boilers, and the horses were all mechanical, not needing to stop for rest. The riders did, but stretching and preventing saddle sores took less time than letting a winded horse rest and eat. That efficiency got them into the regions where the major battles between Dagos and Signia had occurred before nightfall. Everything from here forward can be considered hostile territory, and we won't get much radio contact out here, for obvious reasons. Commander Dax reminded them. Of course. Did you have a spot in mind to rest for the evening? Dominic asked. There is a village not far from here, a nameless cluster of farmhouses. They were shelled by artillery when Dago's soldiers holed up in them. There isn't much left, but it will block the wind, and we might be able to sleep inside. He reported. That works. Nobody likes to sleep in the dirt when they could toss a soft pad on the floor of a farmhouse. Chapter 167, Mortars Prepared. The village was little more than ruins at this point, but it had been made of stone buildings, so there were at least walls to keep the wind down as the soldiers found places to sleep. It was early, which allowed Dominic a few hours to get some work done. He had a wooden post the size of the grenades and large blocks of clay in his storage cube. If he pressed the clay over the post, then added a pair of support legs and a base plate before activating clay to copper, he could make the launching tubes in a matter of minutes. The outsides weren't pretty, and the thickness wasn't perfectly uniform. But they weren't as high pressure of a barrel as the rifles were, just an aiming tube for the mortar grenades. He assembled 20 of them for the evening, and then went looking for Commander Dax. I have mortar tubes and grenades for the team. I haven't tested the orb that made the grenades yet, but they should work. Don't mind the outside. The inside of the tubes is perfectly smooth. The commander chuckled, then examined the mortar launcher. That should be good enough, and the finger holds on the tube will make it easier to carry, even if they weren't intentional. I don't want to test it tonight, but if we find an enemy tomorrow, we will test them quickly during the battle. If they work, we can deploy more of them. There are more of them, aren't there? 20 mortar launchers is pretty good, but the enemy is already in rifle range when we can start using them. So, they're best for a surprise explosive wake-up, followed by a rifle barrage. Dominic nodded. Good, we're on the same page. I will make more tomorrow if I can. I'm low on clay for the clay to copper spell. I need to keep some for spare parts on the rifles. It might not be as ammunition intensive as defending a siege, but I expect that your rifles are going to take a beating over the course of the war. The commander chuckled. Oh, we certainly plan on it. The question is whether everyone has the stomach for what needs to be done. I don't think that most of our men are up for the sort of thing that Dagos did to wavemates. Burning farm villages is a big thing to ask the nobleman of Signia. Dominic patted him on the shoulder. Fear not. Our plans involve targeting military convoys, setting ambushes, and crippling supply lines. It's not about how many we kill, but how much chaos we cause without getting caught. Dominic returned to the truck and found Alexis waiting for him to unlace her so they could sleep. This is all horribly inconvenient. Maybe I should be the one wearing sorcerer's robes. She joked. They're actually quite comfortable. But when it comes to sword fighting, they're not the best. They're not fitted tightly enough, the skirts have no slit for movement, and the sleeves would get in the way. Just think of this as me taking on a trial run for husbandly duties. Dominic replied with a wink. You don't seem at all concerned about the letter from my father. Did it not occur to you to run? She asked as Dominic helped her out of her dress. If Dagos wins, there will be no safe place for me on this side of the continent. Every other nation will fall in line with their demands that all Wavemates refugees be expelled or killed. They have already named me personally as a war criminal, so I doubt that expulsion is going to be an option if I'm caught. Besides, did you really think that I would leave you alone and on the run to avoid that pervert prince? He doesn't even deserve to stand in your presence. Alexis smiled. Letting him read romance novels over her shoulder might have been a mistake. He was becoming entirely too smooth with his lines. They settled in for the night in the carriage, but their relief was short-lived. A soft knock at the door woke them both well before first light. Master Dominic, our scouts have spotted a target. I believe that Dagos sent someone to follow us as we left the city. One of the soldiers whispered. Is it late enough to wake everyone? Alexis replied. It is 3 a.m, Bar. Mississippi prime time for a night raid, and it appears that they have ridden through the night to launch one. The soldier replied. Keeping up the disguise as an earl and countess was not going to be easy on the regiment. Etiquette was too ingrained in them. Prepare the mortars in defensive positions. Keep them hidden under the tents. Do not let the enemy know that we are onto them until they are in mortar range, but get the entire regiment ready for battle. Dominic instructed. Very good, sir. Dominic and Alexis dressed quickly, preparing for battle. Who had followed them and how was a mystery, but if they didn't leave any survivors, there was a good chance that they could escape deeper into Dagos without any more Dagos units in pursuit. Alexis frowned as they prepared for battle, sharpening blades and double-checking rifles. If they're truly tracking us and suspect that I am with the convoy, their commander is going to report back when I am identified. She whispered. Then it's a good thing that he is about to suffer from a battlefield accident. I will put someone on it during the first volley. Dominic replied. If he's an upper noble, he's supposed to be captured and ransomed. She replied. Only if they survive. Duke Albroles had a most unfortunate battlefield accident as well. We didn't even know that he was personally on the battlefield, and cannon fire doesn't discriminate. Dominic shrugged. Alexis gritted her teeth. You are right. I was being too kind to them, even at the risk that they would call for reinforcements. That's the spirit. Under the watchful eyes of the gods and an artillery battery, all men are created equal. Alexis smiled at him. If I didn't know that you just made that up on the spot, it would sound like sage advice from the elders. Chapter 168. Night Raid. The Dagos army scouts tailing them certainly thought that they were sneaky, Dominic decided. They didn't realize that the Signia scouts had Magitech scopes to see in the dark. So, the invaders were still crouched low to the ground, blades at the ready, as they approached the village. 200 meters. 175. Begin bombardment. Commander Dax ordered. The mortar rounds made a sizzling whistle as they launched, the same as a flare or a firework. But nobody was waiting to see where they landed before they loaded more rounds and continued the bombardment. Dozens of explosions rippled across the field over the next 30 seconds, with some landing less than half the distance to the enemy, from launchers that were set at an angle instead of flat. But the effect was everything that they could have hoped for. When the explosion started, they lit up the battlefield at the enemy's position, allowing the riflemen to begin firing. They also made the enemy stand and charge their position, making themselves larger targets. Rifles fired and soldiers fell. But Dominic didn't see the enemy commander on the battlefield. Stay out of sight. Don't let them confirm whether there is even a single female in the convoy. The commander isn't here, and he will run when he realizes that they have lost. Dominic whispered to Alexis as he drew his pistol and waited for the Dago soldiers to get close enough for him to join the battle. Then Dominic wrapped his cloak over himself and pulled the hood up. He could see much better in the dark than anyone else he had met. Far better than even his parents. So he went hunting for the enemy's commander. In the chaos of the battle, one black cloaked figure sneaking out of the far side of the village didn't attract any attention, and it didn't take Dominic long to find the vehicle convoy they had left a little over a kilometer away, on the far side of a hill. No wonder the scouts had spotted them. They were all morons. But the commander was definitely there, standing in front of the headlights of his truck and looking at a document of some sort. Dominic counted for other men with him, most likely the drivers of the trucks, as they weren't gathered near him to give advice. That gave him an easy opportunity. He might not be a skilled sniper, but the trucks still gurgled and hissed as they vented steam at idle, and the fires in the burners crackled softly as the coal burned. If this was the best that Dagos had to offer, they were never going to catch the princess. Dominic crawled through the long grass, and then followed a low hedge beside the road until he was within 20 meters of the trucks. Dominic made a warding gesture for good luck, a habit from his childhood. Then he rushed out of the bushes, and within 5 paces of the Dago's noble. His left hand flickered back and forth, repeatedly cocking the pistol as he fired. Then he reloaded and put 6 more rounds into the downed noble before reloading a second time and turning on the drivers. They seemed so shocked to see someone in their midst that they weren't even charging, just looking around with their swords in their hands. Dominic fired from the other side of the trucks, taking the 4 men down before he realized the issue. He was standing on the other side of the headlights of the vehicle closest to them, so none of the drivers could see a thing past the bright light. A rookie mistake, and not one that Dominic would have expected from professional soldiers. So he fired a round into each of the 4 vehicle cargo areas and then waited to see if there was any movement. Nothing. Carefully, he opened the doors, expecting an ambush at any moment. The vehicles were empty except for crates and backpacks, the standard supplies of a traveling convoy. Dominic pulled a crate from the lead vehicle and swung it open, revealing brightly colored clothing, fit for a high noble. There was a small bag of Dago's gold coins in the chest, and a badge of office that Dominic didn't recognize. It wasn't from Signia, though. He threw the whole chest in his storage cube, then everything else that looked like it might hold valuables. After that, he went through the pockets of the dead drivers, liberating them of their coin purses. The final touch was to steal the hat and boots from the noble, as his jacket was ruined with bullet holes. It would look to the world like he had been ambushed by bandits. After all, what self-respecting soldier would steal a dead man's boots? They were nice boots, though. The battle was ending, and the mortars had stopped. They let Dominic return down the road where the attackers had approached. Body after body, he looted the Dago's nobles' guards dry before returning to the natural sons. Finish looting all the bodies clean. Let the next group to come along clean up the mess. It's not going to be a secret for long that these guardsmen ran afoul of bandits while rushing about like fools in the dark. Use the mana pistols to double-check that there are no survivors. No need to waste ammunition. Dominic instructed. Mana pistols were much quieter than the rifles, and nobody wanted to be reminded of the grim business of ensuring that there were no more spies following them. "Sir, we found something that you might find interesting," one of the soldiers informed Dominic, but he handed the paper directly to Alexis. Alexis sighed as she read the letter. It's a letter from Prince Kaizen to an unnamed retainer. They're supposed to eliminate the regiment and bring me alive to the prince if I'm with them. It doesn't go into details, but it sounds like there are multiple teams. Each of them must be following a team that left the city, searching for me. So he's determined to get to you. Do we know where Josephine is? Dominic asked. Alexis smiled. She's commanding the Signia City Guard. She's still in the palace and will be quite visible. That's a danger of its own, but it will be much harder to abduct her, assuming he wants us both alive. Chapter 169 Raid Failed. Dominic handed the princess the badge of office that he had gathered from the trucks. This was in the commander's gear. It looks like they diverted one of their nobles, who was returning with his retinue. Or private army, Whatever you want to call a traveling military force of this size. He explained. 500 men was not a small force any way that you looked at it. The badge is the Dago's Royal Commission. It doesn't tell us who the noble was, only that they were acting under royal protection and approval. But that is a valuable item to find. Normally, they are intended to self-destruct when the person wearing them or the storage item they are in dies. She explained. It wasn't in his storage item. It was in a trunk in the vehicle he was riding in. Alexis nodded. Good news for us. Now we've got a royal commission to flash at people when we run into a tight situation. We surely will one day when we don't make a smooth escape after an ambush. Lady A, we're bringing the vehicles forward, to make it appear that they were ambushed here, and not away from their vehicles. That should sell the appearance that it was bandits or deserters who attacked them. Once that is done, we will move out. What is our next target? Commander Dax asked. The Tun Springs as the headwater of the Tun River. Our last update says that there are 5 small armies headed toward Signia from that direction. Each is fewer than 2,000 men. If we can hit them, we can cut down on the number of raiding armies that will threaten our border barons. Alexis explained. Understood. We will send out scouts right away. If they've been moving for 2 days, some of their mechanized forces might be close to us by now. Dax agreed. It was about 500 kilometers to the town of the Tun River, with very minimally maintained farm roads. Plus, they were in the rainy season, so moving across open country in the less capable Dago's design trucks wouldn't be easy. The Signia design trucks would be a warning to anyone who saw their convoy that they weren't locals. But they couldn't afford to swap them for trucks that would constantly get stuck and break down. In the distance, Dominic heard the sound of vehicles and sighed. You had to go and say it. We've got mechanized forces to the north, we need to move now. He explained. Everyone into the woods. Pack everything. Leave no sign we were here. Dax shouted. The Dago's trucks were just dropped off as the rest of the unit started moving east, hiding on the far side of a small patch of trees. If that force is small, should we try to hit it? Dax asked. Dominic shook his head. Only if we get the perfect opportunity. We aren't going to get supplies or reinforcements, so we can't afford to lose anyone on the first day. They rushed away, unable to hide their tracks across the grasslands. If the army wanted to find them, it would. But the woods were only 50 meters deep, just enough to hide them from sight. If they stayed near the backside of them, they could fire mortars over until they ran out, then deal with the survivors when they came through or around the trees. The scouts spread out, keeping watch for the approach of the enemy. They were coming, but they were following a road further west of where the destroyed village had been. 2 tense hours later, the all-clear signal was given. The army hadn't stopped to check out the parked vehicles, and had simply assumed that the Dago's heraldry on the sides meant that they were friendly. They might have reported it to someone else, but the army was under orders to advance, and they weren't going to go off course just to check out such a small group of vehicles. There was no way that they could know that hundreds of infantrymen had been accompanying them the day before. Let's head north, get behind the army's movement if we can, and find a good spot to set up ambushes when we spot more units on the move. Alexis directed. They might have the edge with their new artillery, but most of the military units that they were going to encounter would be much larger than their own, and they couldn't afford to make mistakes while they were in enemy territory. It didn't take them long to find both the perfect spot and a Dago's army unit to ambush in it. Scouts report that they have eliminated 6 enemy forward observers. There is a defensible position within the trees to the east, an old keep wall still standing. Dax reported. All right, alter course. Let's get into cover and lure in the enemy. Dominic agreed. They're already on it. Getting the trucks through the overgrown area and into the ruins of the keep was not easy, but Signia had adapted their trucks from either mail carriages or farm tractors, both of which were exceptionally capable on rough terrain. In this case, they were all based on tractors, and as long as a single wheel could find traction, they would keep moving. Blankets were tossed over the boilers to silence them and keep the heat in while they rested, reducing the mana needed to get them back up to temperature when it was time to leave. They have spotted the scouts, and they're in pursuit. 2,000 meters and closing fast. Commander Dax reported. Riflemen to the tree line, lay flat in cover. Wait for the signal to shoot. Mortars set up on the wall. I have munitions for you all. Dominic instructed. The wall was 60 meters from the tree line, well short of where the closest of misfired mortars had landed last time. But with that incident for practice, the riflemen would be better this time. They're stopping short of the trees. For 100 meters. They are deploying archers with the infantry. The observer reported. Dominic quickly altered a fresh batch of the mortars for a longer fuse and more propellant. Use only these until they get closer. They're set for 300 to 400 meters. Dominic explained. They're forming ranks. Phalanx formation in front of the archers. Fire. The mortars whistled, and the launchers thumped down into the dirt as they fired, while the 20 men began loading them every few seconds, letting the mortars fly and praying that the distances were correct. Explosions shook the battlefield, small at first, then a chain of larger detonations. Direct mortar strike on a powder wagon. 70% accuracy on the archer ranks. 90% of mortars are on target to the unit. The infantry is charging the trees. Switch rounds. Shell the infantry and break the phalanx. Alexis ordered as Dominic made and passed out more rounds. Now that the infantry was moving, the rifles were working overtime, cutting down as many as they could. Then, the first few mortars bounced off shields and fell among the infantry before detonating. The phalanx crumbled from within, and the front rank collapsed to the rifles as the mortars continued to fire. They are retreating, the observer reported. The rifles continued to fire for a few more minutes, and then a triple-tone whistle from the tree line stopped the fire. Revolvers out, get what we can, and let's get out of here, Commander Dax ordered. Chapter 170. Sweep and move. The sweep was fast, with sporadic pistol fire as they moved through the defeated infantry. The detonation of the powder wagon had destroyed most of the enemy forces' supplies, but the unit managed to come back with what looked like an entire truck worth of field rations. They were only 2 days out of the palace, so they didn't have a lot of room, but all the crates were quickly strapped to the outside or roof of the trucks, and they were moving again, headed inland. The survivors went straight west. They're unlikely to come across the first battlefield, but we looted this one as well. Commander Dax reported. Excellent work. Let's find a safe spot to sleep for the night, and let the Dago's army wonder why their team isn't reporting in. Alexis agreed. Aren't they just too poorly armed? Dominic asked as they moved out of the ruins, looking for somewhere as good that wasn't next to a fresh battlefield. Alexis shrugged. They're traditionally armed. I don't think that Dagos can actually afford to supply them all with magitech, so they're sending them as heavy infantry like they did 100 years ago. It worked well enough then, and for the most part it will work now. But not against riflemen. Free/novelbin.co 1,000 kilometers to their southwest, stopped at Staptentave, just inside the Dagos borders, Prince Kaizen was fuming. The unit that he had sent to find Princess Alexis had been massacred, and the tracking spell which should have been triggered when her location was verified had never been used. What the hell had they run into inside their own borders? None of the other surviving princes were going to go down easily, and if he didn't get this tie to the Signia royalty before they conquered the nation, he would have to deal with mass rebellions when his people were already starving. Worse, every village that they managed to raid along the Signia border had either destroyed the techno-wizard's shop before the village fell, or the damnable magicians had retreated before he even arrived. They had nothing to show for their raids, and they still didn't understand how the Signia airships could have both a speed and altitude advantage on the designs that they had paid so much to acquire from West Kyria. The paratrooper technique had worked brilliantly at first, but now Signia was adapting to it. But Kaizen didn't really care about that. It had served its purpose, and all that he had to do now was capture his wayward concubine before he conquered her nation. In his mind, it was just that simple. If he wanted things done right, he was going to have to do them himself. Dispatch the royal guard to hunt down the war criminal and the concubine. I want both alive if possible, but I won't be too upset if the sorcerer is dead. Just ensure that he does not escape. I don't know what gold-blinded traitor told West Kyria, But word is spreading that a prince of wavemates has survived, and if they can get their hands on him, those Kyrian bastards are sure to use it as an excuse to raise an army against us while we're mired in insignia. The prince ordered his advisor. "It will be done, your highness." Deep in the woods near the village of the Tun River, the Natural Sons had found an abandoned trading post, defunct since a flood 80 years ago had changed the course of the river. There was no sign of habitation after that, and even the closest farms were near the horizon. It looked to the casual eye as if the nation were actually losing population, but they were actually undergoing industrialization, and the people were flocking to the city chasing the promise of jobs that paid more than subsistence. Whether they actually did or not was questionable, and the quality of life in the coal smoke and filth of the Dago's major cities was not much better than struggling to keep a garden in the wilderness. But to the struggling youth of the rural areas, the dream of a better life shone far brighter than the reality of the cities. Droughts had been a constant companion for most of a decade, and for the majority of the farmers, tax levies were taking the subsistence out of subsistence farming. "Commander, send someone to scout the farm village. Give them one of the Dago's ration crates in case they need help getting people to talk. Don't take the mechanical horses into town. Leave them with the scouts, and keep the team under 3 men. Alexis ordered. "Understood. They will get the information that we need." Dax agreed. She would have preferred to go herself, but with the prince searching for them, the chance that either her or Dominic would be recognized was too high. Anonymity was a form of safety, and until they could no longer keep it up, she knew that her best bet was to keep her head down. Dominic was in the same situation. Even if they weren't looking for him specifically, it was a death penalty for a sorcerer to even be in Dago's uninvited. Going in to scout for himself was far too risky. An hour later, the sun was nearly setting, and Commander Dax approached the village's lone inn. "Stranger, what can we do for you?" the innkeeper asked. "I don't suppose that you've got drink? You see, my friends and I are working in the area, and I've built up a mighty thirst," he asked. The commander was a handsome young man, every bit the playboy young noble that the Natural Sons Regiment had been looking for. The innkeeper nodded. "The Baron taxes any money he finds in our hands, so we are a barter-only establishment." Dax smiled and set out a kilo of cured ham from the Dago's military rations. It was clearly bagged for military use, a calculated risk on his part. The innkeeper smiled and moved the ham beneath the counter, then poured an ale for the young noble. "That should cover you for the evening. If your band of caring gents should happen to come across more of the same, let me know, and can work a way to pay you for them. The crops haven't been good lately, and we're still a few weeks from planting season when the rains slow," he whispered. Dax winked at him. "If we are able to remain in the area, we will have plenty to trade. I hope you like barley. The gentleman we met along the highway donated it to us in 50-kilo sacks. In that case, I don't suppose that it's been a lonely trip? My Lydia is widowed, but she's a kindly sort," the innkeeper offered. Tempting, but Dax had work to do. "Perhaps the next time that I visit. My friends and I just needed to make sure that your village was made of good and pious sorts, not those warmongering pompous Westerners." The innkeeper nodded. "There are more than enough of those around. They've set up a recruitment and training facility northwest of here. Best steer clear. They've taken every boy between 12 and 20 for the army, and far too many of the girls as well." Chapter 171. Scouting Dago's Villages. Dax left after his 4th ale, and watched as the innkeeper went door to door, handing out chunks of ham to the villagers. This was a good village if you were a bandit. They knew how to keep their mouths shut and their heads down, so they didn't draw the attention of the authorities. Plus, they were willing to make a trade to get what they needed. Some had too much pride for that, and you couldn't trust a prideful man not to do something dumb. "Did you get the news you needed?" Princess Alexis asked as the commander returned to the camp, smelling vaguely of cheap ale. "I did. The village is starving, there are no boys or young men left, and the nobles have claimed most of their girls as well. They have no love for king or country. But most importantly, there is a major military training facility northwest of the village, across the river. That is going to be too much for us to deal with, but if we can embed some scouts in the area, We should be able to send reports of troop movements the moment they leave. Good for us. Good for anyone we can contact. Dax reported. I trust the cost wasn't too high? A single kilo of smoked ham. I believe that we should send men to the village tomorrow with a few sacks of barley for planting, and some more essentials. Not enough to raise suspicions, but enough to keep the locals quiet. They should let us operate out of here for a while if we do, he suggested. Princess Alexis considered the options, then nodded. We won't be here more than 4 or 5 days before it's not safe anymore. But if we need to come back later, I want the villagers on our side. The next morning, the scouts were sent out, along with a pair of more social soldiers who would make the delivery to the village. They were sure not to send anyone who had the signature signia blonde hair, which was a bit paler than the rich gold of Dominic's hair and horns. That would make it too obvious that they were foreigners and not bandits or deserters. Commander, Princess, we've got reports of a military unit moving out. 100 infantry, no vehicles. No confirmation yet, but the scouts who went to the village suspect that they're one of the so-called procurement teams that scour the villages for hidden wealth or military-age residents and collect the livestock and crop tithes. The scouts reported late that evening. Princess Alexis smiled. How far are they from their first village stop? They are stopped for the night 10 kilometers from anything. They normally start at the far side of their rotation, so they can herd the animals straight back to the military camp. He explained. The princess took out her topographical map of the area and the soldier pointed at the spot the unit was resting. Skip the artillery. Send 20 scouts on horseback before it's dark and eliminate them. Take everything, she ordered. The mechanical horses were draped with cloth, as an attempt to camouflage them and disguise their silhouette on the skyline when the riders were laying flat on their backs. So, there was some hope that they wouldn't immediately give the unit away. But it got dark fast in the hills, and Dominic was left waiting uneasily in the dark for reports from the unit. Finally, the report came in. They got them all without any casualties, and stuffed them in an old ice shed, then buried the door. With some luck, it will take a few days or a week before anyone finds them. The runner finally reported. Good work, gentlemen. Settle in for the night, and we will wait for more reports of troop movements. Princess Alexis congratulated him. Dominic woke the next morning with Princess Alexis wrapped in his arms, snoring quietly as the sun came in through the window shutters. It was a shame to have to get out of bed, but the morning reports would be ready soon, and he wanted to know if anyone had reported the soldiers missing yet. How long it took them to send a team looking for the soldiers would be the baseline for their response time to any other attacks that were launched in the region. I'm awake. I just didn't want to get up and face reality yet. Alexis informed him quietly a few seconds after the snoring stopped. That's fine. I wasn't ready to get up either. But I suppose that we should see what the scouts have found this morning. Today's dress was nearly the same tan color as the dried leaves in their camp, and Dominic made sure that Alexis' outfit was perfect with the decorative armor she wore before heading out. It was odd to see her in such light armor, given her status as a paladin. Her formal armor was nearly impenetrable. But in this, she would have to rely much more heavily on barrier and mage armor-type spells for defense. Good morning, Lord and Lady. No movement reported from the military camp this morning. However, we have seen an opportunity. They receive a train car of recruits once a month, according to the locals. It's due in just a few days. The recruits have all been conscripted, and they're kept under lock and key until they reach the camp. The villagers suggest that if our group of friends has the manpower, nobody would be heartbroken for their train not to make it to the camp. Commander Dax reported. Then the commander paused. There was another request. I don't know if it's a good idea, but the boys want mortar launchers in rifle form. Ones they can fire while moving or standing. It would be easier than setting them up. Like firing fireworks at their friends? It wouldn't be even remotely accurate at longer ranges if you're not planting it. But if you want to just shoot people in the face with a mortar, I don't see why I couldn't make them. Dominic hesitantly agreed. This was either going to be a terrible or a brilliant idea. Commander Dax smiled as Dominic seemed to accept the idea. We collected a lot of clay from the river and filtered it to get rid of debris. We can cut it into sheets if you need. I don't know what it takes to make the tubes, but they look like they're just tubes, and the mortars are the magic part. Dominic nodded. If you really wanted, you could light the mortars and throw them at people. You might die if you don't have a good arm, but you could do it. How would you light them? Dax asked, confused. There is a rough spot in the tube and flint on the mortar fin next to the wick. You could light the fuse with a lighter and throw it as it starts to fly. But don't do that. It might blow up in your hand. Actually, give me a minute and I think that I can make a mortar rifle with a trigger and all. Like the old flintlock rifles, it just needs to ignite the mortar. I imbued the fuse with black powder to help it light, so only a small spark is enough. Dominic agreed. Dax patted him on the shoulder. Trust me, it will be brilliant the second time we use it from horseback. I make no promises about the first time. Chapter 172. Safety measures? Dominic considered what it would take to make the tubes quickly and efficiently. A handle mounted to a tube with a hole in the side, where a rough rotating striker could slide along the side of the loaded mortar, would do the job. He wouldn't even try to enclose it, just teach the teams how to load them safely with the striker moved out of the way. These weapons would be insanely dangerous, not only to their enemies but possibly to the users as well. But the men were intelligent, they would figure it out soon enough. Plus, this version could be kept loaded. Take it out of storage, aim and fire, then drop it back into your storage cube or reload it. The simpler the design, the better. Dominic finished the design, then made a cutting template out of the copper sheeting he already had. It would cut the clay like a cookie cutter, and then he just needed to bend it to shape and assemble the launchers. He could probably even get the unit to help make their own, and he would finish them. That would save a lot of time, and if the goal was to have 500 mortar launchers, it was the best option. Commander? I need helpers. Some to roll the clay into thin sheets, then reform the scrap clay after I stamp out the pieces. Then I need a few to bend the copper tubes and handles into shape, so I can assemble them later. If you want to equip whole teams of the regiment, this is the only way it will happen in under a month. Dominic explained. Dax nodded. I have a few with some mechanical skills as the sons of knights and barons. We will get it handled. A few minutes later, clay was rolled thin on a table, like biscuit dough, and Dominic cut the pieces, then turned them to copper and let them gather the scrap. The pieces were moved to a bucket, and a pair with hammers and wooden dowels bent the copper into a tube and capped the end with the attached flap. Dominic would have to braze that and attach the handle pieces later, but 90% of the work was done. Over and over, they cut and stamped until afternoon came around, and Dominic started the final assembly of 100 units. He still hadn't even made more ammunition for them, but by night, he should be ready to teach the unit how to use them, and then they could go test them on the first army unit they found moving around in their territory. Alright, there are two basic things to remember when using these. I put a wooden stick in this hole so a preloaded mortar doesn't fall out. Remove it before use. The striker is stored in the ready position and there is a bit of cloth around the tube to keep it from striking the mortar accidentally. That also gets moved before use. Make sure the striker is in this position, and nobody is on your right. Remove the safeties and do not point the mortar downward. It's not a rifle, the fit isn't that tight, and it could slide down the tube far enough to disengage. Once you have fired, ensure that the striker is rotated back into position. It should be, but if there is damage, it might not rotate smoothly. Drop another mortar down the tube. Thump it on the ground to get the mortar to the bottom, and then put it back on your shoulder and fire. The men chosen for the first mortars practiced the motion dozens of times using rocks instead of mortars. Once they were sure they had it, Dominic had them cover the striker hole and gave them the first round of mortars to load. Now, put the safety rod in them to hold it in place and put them in storage. I will make more munitions right away so you have spares. Those will detonate either on hard contact with something, or at 200 meters. The casings are ceramic and they're full of ceramic balls, so they're meant to take out infantry, but they will also punch holes in most steam vessels. Any questions? He finished. The team smirked. No, we've got it, boss. The boys have been practicing without them since you first explained it this afternoon. 20 mortars in the camp was great, so this should be even better. And we will be able to see what we're shooting at. The opportunity to test them came the next evening, just before sundown. A team had been sent out, traveling south along the river to meet up with a larger group that was supposed to come along later in the week, according to the scouts who had been visiting with the locals. At first, the locals had been reluctant to discuss anything that would get the patrols attacked, but a little persuasion by the natural sons had gotten them to reveal that it had been 6 months since the last time they had anyone of recruitment age, so not a one of the young soldiers being deployed was from their region at all. Once that started to sink in with the locals, they were much less averse to providing information to the bandits who supplied them with food stolen from the soldiers. It was a trade of necessity. The regiment didn't mess with their farms. They didn't report the fact that all of their food was being donated from the bandits. Commander Dax will lead the strike team today, all armed with the new mortar launchers. Good luck, Commander. Collect as much data as possible, and we will see you soon. Dominic informed them. Princess Alexis cleared her throat. Actually, we will join them and watch from a distance. We need first-hand knowledge of how they are working in practice, or we won't be able to effectively deploy them in a larger battle. Understood. Well, gentlemen, it looks like you've got a couple of observers. Just give us some time to get in place, as your mechanical horses are faster than our legs. Chapter 173, Bait and Switch. Dominic and Alexis moved on foot so that they weren't risking one of the regiment's mechanical horses if they should get caught while traveling. They shouldn't be at too much risk. They both appeared to be nobles and could act the part, which would make them less likely to be mistaken as deserters. But if that were the case, they were both well armed and armored. It wouldn't be too difficult for either of them to take down a small patrol, if the patrol wasn't using any magic. The light was fading, so they would pretend to be setting up camp along the route that the patrol was going to take, not far from where the men were expecting to launch the ambush. But like all well-laid plans, this one did not survive its first encounter with the real world. You setting up the tent. Who are you and what is your business here? A deep voice demanded. Dominic put the mallet down and stood to greet the visitor. This is the best road, if you can even call it that, from Staptentave to Midgex. Our convoy was attacked 2 nights ago, so my wife and I are making our way on foot, of course. Dominic replied. And who might you be? The soldier repeated as Dominic had skipped that part of the answer. Earl Nick of Totbu. Whom might I be addressing? Dominic asked. The soldier frowned. He didn't know any Earl of Totbu. In fact, he had no idea where Totbu was. But something about this strange man and his wife, traveling alone and on foot, without any retainers or guards, seemed wrong to him. Boys, search them. I do believe that we've got a pair of new volunteers for the camp. The unit commander instructed his men with a grim chuckle. Dominic smiled at him. I believe there might be some misunderstanding. The soldier sneered and opened his mouth to retort, just in time for Dominic to pull his pistol and put a bullet through his forehead. The patrolman froze, unable to process the fact that this young nobleman had just murdered a major from the Dago's army in cold blood. Then, explosions tore through the outer edges of the group, and Dominic's hand flew over the action of the revolver as the closest guards tried to rush him. Alexis had a mace and shield equipped, both glowing with holy magic. Ambush! Bastards set a trap for us. Someone was shouting in the distance as the sound of hooves on soft dirt joined the explosions. Then rifles were firing, and Dominic found that he had enough room to hurl fireballs at the enemy. The sweeping charge by the cavalry had launched 100 mortars into the general vicinity of a group of 500 soldiers, who hadn't even seen them coming in the fading light. Calling the situation a battle was being extremely generous to the Dago soldiers' odds of survival. Dominic felt a sharp pain in his shoulder as a crossbow bolt hit his mage armor spell, but it didn't break. That was sure to leave a bruise tomorrow, though. He added the necessity to increase the level of the sorcerer's spellbook to his list of future tasks, and then hurled an arcane blast into the crossbowman, healing the bruise as it formed. Beside him, Princess Alexis whistled the retreat call, and the cavalry broke off their attack, firing a few final rounds, and then charging toward her and Dominic, who hurried to pack the decoy tent back into his storage cube. It was a stolen Dago's military tent, but he wanted to use it again later. They were grabbed by the mounted riflemen and swung up behind the riders for the charge back to camp, while Commander Dax laughed. That might have actually worked better than the actual plan. They were so distracted by the possibility of getting to capture a noblewoman that they weren't even watching the perimeter. Every eye in the patrol was on the two of you, he joked. Princess Alexis chuckled. You have a point. We do make lovely bait, don't we? We should work that into the next few ambush plans. If the enemy stops and gathers to talk to us, they make perfect targets for the mortar launchers. I didn't see any extremely off-target mortars. Were there any issues? Dax shook his head. No, they worked perfectly, and everyone was able to more or less guess where they were going to end up, even though it was their first shot. Very intuitive. However, they're nearly impossible to reload in the dark while on horseback. That's why we put them away and switched to rifles. Well, no weapon is perfect, but 100 against a 500 soldier patrol was far more than needed. Did you even all fire? Alexis asked. A few of the men still have their first round in reserve, but we put multiple mortars into the transports. Someone is going to realize that we didn't loot those soon, though, Dax replied. Alexis nodded. I'm counting on it. Have your scouts inform the locals that there are disabled trucks full of supplies here, and see what they do. If we're pushing their willingness to work with bandits too far, we can move on. However, if they're willing to loot the supplies for themselves, I say that we can trust them enough to stay a bit longer. Dax saluted her, then broke away to have one of his men send a message. They weren't far from the nearest village. The men there should be able to get here not long after first light and pretend to render aid to the survivors, while looting the convoy clean. The soldiers dropped them at camp, and Alexis clapped Dominic on the shoulder. And that's a job well done. Dagos will pay heavily for mistreating their citizens. Even after we leave, I wouldn't be shocked if the locals formed a new bandit group that started to make the tithe-gathering groups go missing, she announced. Chapter 174, On the Hunt. In the wilderness of southeastern Dagos, Prince Kaizen looked at the stack of reports that had been received in the last day. What is all this? Bandits, deserters, peasant uprising? How inept was the former king that things have gotten this bad in the east? He demanded of his advisor, Your Majesty, the nobles of this region were never wealthy, and they have suffered a decade of drought. Most spent every penny of their coffers to avoid starvation, then went off to war and didn't return. The siege at Burton alone killed 10,000 local peasants and many of their barons. The massacres outside Cleoe were even worse, and it is said that half the population of Mijex is buried in Signia now. The noble rulers are largely dead or young men of no accomplishments, and the populations are so depleted that the remainder of the peasants feel that they have been abandoned. Should we return to the capital and send a compliance army to the region to get things back under control before Signia's infiltration forces arrive? The advisor asked. No. The border spies say that the Natural Sons butchers are somewhere in this region, and if they're here, then Princess Alexis is here as well. Continue on this course, and have the scouts ask about battles and reports of large bandit groups. Kaizen demanded. The advisor bowed and retreated so that the prince wouldn't see him roll his eyes. The prince might have strong political support, but that was in the capital. Out here, he had only a small retinue under 1,000 men, and some of the peasant villages were close to that number. If they got caught up in a local uprising, they might be mired for days or weeks while the nation needed strong leadership. Advisor, I believe that we've found a sign of the Natural Sons. There was an attack by bandits, stripped the convoy searching for the princess clean. But when the scouts found the site, there were signs of explosives. Either the bandits have artillery, or there was a powerful mage with them. One of the Dagos royal guards reported. A powerful mage? Like a dragonkin? If he is there, then the princess is there as well. Bring the convoy to the site, and we will start our search for the wayward Signia Royal. The advisor decided. 2 hours later, their convoy was at the site of the battle, and Prince Kaizen was out with his advisor, examining the decaying bodies, which had now been set upon by wild animals. It was clear that they had been completely stripped of valuables, and the convoy was looted. These explosions, they're not magic, the leader of Prince Kaizan's guards declared. What do you mean? The prince demanded. Look here. There is shrapnel in the bodies. The grass is powder burnt. I can still smell it. And on these jackets there are blast burns along with fragmentation damage. They were not ambushed with magic. They were attacked with explosive cannon fire designed to make it look like they had died to magic. I fear that someone is baiting us into a trap, Your Majesty, he explained. Prince Kaizan sat down on the running board of his truck. If this wasn't the princess and her regiment, then where did she go? He muttered. There is some hope that it might be her. Many of the guards were shot with lead shot. Now, those could be any sort of rifle, but your agent was shot 12 times with a mana weapon. The guard captain suggested. The advisor walked over and shook his head. He was shot at point-blank range 12 times. Almost certainly a revolver. You can see how they continued to shoot as he was falling by the way that the wounds angle. That's personal. How so? The prince asked. A mana revolver holds 6 shots. He was shot 12 times, and they took both his sword and scabbard, which suggests that he was not holding the weapon when he died. Most of the others still have the scabbards, as they're not valuable enough to resell. Whoever did this stopped to reload, then shot until the weapon was empty again. The advisor replied, Someone is definitely messing with us. Could be a robbery gone wrong, it could be a message. Who has a map? Where would they have been headed if they were ambushed here? Prince Kaizan asked. If they continued on the route that brought them here, they would pass the Foneven River and into Albrol's territory. They've been moving almost perfectly straight away from Signia City, if they came from the reported checkpoint incident here. It is possible that they're headed for the Duke's estate to install one of his relatives in the position to challenge for the throne. All his sons are dead, but his brothers have many sons and strong military merits of their own. If someone manages to stop their infighting, they could well challenge for the throne, especially with the tragedy in defense of the nation. The advisor noted. Prince Kaizan frowned. How many people live in Albrol City? 800,000. Give or take? The advisor replied. Damn. Prince Kaizan turned and punched the door of the truck. We can't afford the chance that they're headed to unite Albrols behind a political successor. Turn northwest and make for Albrol City. Call off the search for the princess for now, but keep sending me all reports of suspicious activity along with the banditry reports. Sir, we found the tracker. It took shrapnel from one of the explosions, which is what deactivated it. One of the royal guards reported. Understood. Everyone load up. We have work to do. The guards retreated from Prince Kaizan's temper. Nothing was going right for him lately. The king of Signia had laughed at him. One princess was missing, while the other taunted his armies from the walls of the capital, and now his search party had been ambushed by bandits with stolen military equipment. The advisors and officers knew that more likely than not, it was half-starved peasants from the next few villages up the road. But none of them would dare to tell the future king that the level of mismanagement was truly so bad that open rebellion was the status quo any time royal tax collectors passed through. Chapter 175, Vague Loyalties. 3 days after the last ambush, Dominic and Princess Alexis were ready to head out again. The locals had quietly collected the goods from the military convoy and disposed of the bodies. As far as Dominic could tell, they were more likely to be loyal to the bandits feeding them than to the lords who claimed dominion over the region. At least until the army showed up. That was what the natural sons would be preventing today. The last convoy going missing had stirred up trouble within the camp, with many reports of random punishments and increased training. From the viewpoint of the scouts and locals, it appeared that the camp overseers believed the entire unit had deserted. Your Highness, we have confirmed. There were survivors from the attack, over 20 of them. Commander Dax reported. Princess Alexis gave him a sly smirk. Yet, the word never got back to the training camp that they were ambushed? Perhaps they aren't wrong to say that the unit deserted. Just not as many of them as they had thought. Then her face returned to her serious scowl, used only when doing strategic planning. As before, we will set up camp and pretend to be traveling nobles, but this time with a trio of guards. That should make it more believable. But this time we will attack in broad daylight, so don't expect to be able to keep up the element of surprise as easily. This is our target camping spot, just on the edge of a stand of trees, but 50 meters out, so it doesn't immediately look like we're trying to lure them in. I want 50 mortar men south of the road, hidden in the fields and hedges. The remainder of the strike team will be behind us. Once the attack starts, it is your judgment call whether to charge out, start with rifle fire, or continue to use the mortar launchers. Advisor Dominic has made quite a few of them, and most of you now have one in your possession. So don't be stingy with the artillery. Daytime attacks should allow you to reload safely as well. This unit is larger than the last one, and they're not headed along the village route. They're headed toward Signia. They can't be allowed to pass. She reminded the unit. Understood. They responded in unison. Dominic and Alexis rode with their guards for the mission, who hid their mechanical horses in a crumbling barn next to an abandoned farmhouse 100 meters from where they were setting camp. That was close enough for a rapid retreat, but far enough that they wouldn't be noticed by the approaching military unit. Dominic started a small cook fire and began roasting some of the cured pork they had claimed from the soldiers' rations. If that didn't get the attention of the military unit, nothing would. They had looted the villagers dry. None of them would be expected to have meat of any sort. You there. Who are you? And why haven't you reported for military service? The leader of the approaching military unit demanded. I am Earl Nick of Totbu. What level of entitlement are you peasants on, to assume that a titled and landed noble was subject to the draft? Dominic demanded. The unit commander spluttered for a moment. My father was Baron Orland of Venezia, a war martyr at the siege of Burton. He stammered. So, an untitled younger son, not a commoner? You should know better than to speak that way to your betters. Dominic retorted. Behind him, Dominic heard the guards chuckle. If this man didn't challenge him to a duel, he was definitely going to try to kill the advisor without the formalities of a duel. The rasp of steel on leather marked the moment that the commander drew his blade, and then a single crack of a pistol signaled the moment of his death. The commander toppled from his horse, and Dominic turned to the officer next to him. It seems that I have happened upon an entire unit of commoner revolutionists. He gasped with overly dramatic hand gestures, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The advisor enjoys killing Dago's soldiers a little too much. The rifleman on his left whispered. There is history between him and Dago's. Princess Alexis agreed, while the other commanders struggled to come to terms with the fact that their leader had just been shot dead half a day from the training camp, and by one of their own nobles. Capture them. The general will know what to do with them. One of the officers shouted. From out of the nearby bushes and long grass, 100 riflemen rose up, mortar launchers on their shoulders, and began to bombard the convoy. Then, from behind them, 400 more cavalry rushed past, firing into the survivors, while the front rank switched to their rifles. You traitorous bastard! The surviving command officer realized, a full 10 seconds too late. Goodbye, Dominic agreed as he ended the man with a single shot. He was getting better at that. The pistol was proving easier than expected to learn. Carefully, the rifleman who had dismounted for the ambush approached, and began to search the bodies before dragging them off the road. Not a single storage cube to be found. Is there one among the officers? Commander Dax asked. Dominic checked the bodies, and tossed the 2 that were on the convoy's leader to Dax. Load them up. All the supplies we can get, then weapons if there is space. Princess Alexis directed. Rapid hooves clicking on the road in the distance caught the attention of the scouts, and a shrill whistle went up. Everyone regroup. Get away from the road. Don't be spotted as you return to the ambush position. The attack has been noticed, but we're still going to take out the second group. Ambush team, retreat 100 meters north and prepare to engage the second wave. Reload in advance. Dominic ordered. Everyone shifted into position, and Dominic ran to the trucks, kicking them into gear and letting them drive over the evidence of the battle as they trundled down the road at an idle. That would confuse the enemy as to the location of the attack. Chapter 176. Overlapping Combat Zones. Alexis led their guards back to the abandoned farmhouse as Dominic pulled the last of the bodies off the road. The next group was approaching fast, too fast for him to join the group at the house. The best he could do was to put a dead soldier and a barrier over himself and lay down in the ditch. With a bit of luck, none of the mortars would land directly on him, but his area barrier should be enough to take the hit without any issues. One of the horsemen whistled as he skidded to a stop, and Dominic recognized a Signia mechanical horse above him, along with the colors of the Royal Army. The riflemen had seen the same thing, and they were hesitating to shoot. This might be one of their own units. Shit, I don't know what they ran into, but it was efficient. Someone go stop those trucks, the drivers are probably dead. Check the corpses for any usable intelligence. The leader of the group insisted. Dominic calculated the odds that this was a trap, and then rolled the body off himself before getting to his feet. "Advisor," one of the soldiers asked, confused. "Oh? You are ours then. Good thing we didn't shoot first and ask questions later. What are you doing out here?" Dominic asked. "The 4th Reserve Regiment and the Biverlo Regulars have been assigned to take out a Dago's training camp in the area. What are you doing out here alone?" The colonel replied. "Killing Dago's soldiers, of course. But I'm actually with the Natural Sons Regiment. The idea is to make Dagos think that the princess fled the capital, so they send royals out to chase her." Dominic explained. "And then your riflemen get to ambush Dago's royal guards and possibly finish off the royal lineage. That's brilliant. Evil but brilliant." Dominic nodded. He liked when a man came to the right conclusions the first time. Don't attack the villages, they're just old people and cripples anyhow. The riflemen have been acting as benevolent bandits, and the locals have been covering for us. Dominic added. "I don't see the riflemen," the colonel noted. "Thank you. That's the point. But they're all within rifle range. If you want to search for intelligence on the bodies, go ahead. I didn't get time to fully strip them this time. We will attribute the kill to your team, and you can rejoin the assault on the training camp." The colonel smiled. "You're a good man, advisor, and one hell of a field commander if you managed this without a single dead rifleman. We haven't lost a man since Burton, but that's all on their own skills, not my orders." Dominic agreed. The soldiers quickly searched the bodies along the road while a pair rode off to stop the trucks that Dominic had made idle away. "Good work, advisor. We will report in to the capital tonight after the base falls," the colonel informed him. "I would thank you not to mention seeing us. The king knows where we are, and at the moment, he is the only one who needs to. Confirmed reports of our location and mission may cause Dagos to call off the search for the princes, and we want to lure them into the ambush." Dominic explained. "Where should we watch for your men next?" the colonel asked carefully, trying to make it obvious he just didn't want to end up in an ambush by his own allies. "Once we are sure that they're not going to come all the way here to check in person, we will make our way to Albrols. The city there is huge. It shouldn't take long to bait out some big fish with banditry in the region." "Understood, happy hunting." The soldiers finished up and rode away, hurrying to rejoin the other units for the attack. "How long do you think it will take before someone reports in that we're in the Tun River region without the princess?" Commander Dax asked as he left the ambush location. "I give it about a week before the news is back to the Dagos royals. The question is whether they believe it or send out an entire army to come and make sure that she wasn't hiding nearby." Dominic replied. "The better question is whether we want them to believe it or not. We could happily ambush soldiers all over Dagos if nobody was out looking for us." Dax reminded him. "I can't argue with that. Those shoulder-fired mortars are stupidly effective. But we should clean up and leave before someone comes looking for us again. It was good luck that our men and not the enemy who heard the first battle, but they might have just been closest. The important bits were looted, and the regiment mounted up to return to their camp. Taking dozens of routes back, each with only a few riders, would make the area look well-traveled, but not a single well-worn path that would let anyone passing know that there was a large force in the ruins. Staying here much longer would make the routes in and out too well-traveled. but they were doing their best to cover the entrance with branches and greenery after the patrols passed. Once they were settled back into the camp, Dominic explained the situation to Princess Alexis, who called the leadership of the regiment to join them. "Gentlemen, the way that I see it, we have two choices. We can continue to work this area, hoping for soldiers to pass, or we can move west or northwest, where we know that there will be more soldiers moving down the major roads. That's the higher risk, higher reward option. I am leaning toward pushing Dagos to send an actual army against us. Cavalry-mounted artillery isn't anything that they're equipped to deal with, and we could cause massive destruction by the time that they adapted. Every force that we keep in the northeast of Dagos is a force that won't be headed to Signia. I have faith that my brothers will settle this war soon, and when they do, it would be to our benefit to have some merits to show for ourselves." She elaborated. It was solid logic. Dangerous, but potentially rewarding. Chapter 177. Cold Shoulder. In the ducal palace in Albrols, Prince Kaisan had not received the warm reception that he had been hoping for. "Your Highness, I believe that you may have overstepped your authority. The rightful leader of the nation is not you, but the eldest legitimate son of the former king. At the moment, the eldest legitimate son who is not in enemy custody is the Viscount Boscombe. The new Duke Albrols, brother of the deceased duke, announced in a cold tone. I am still your regent, and you will behave as such." Prince Kaisan demanded. "Respectfully, Highness, you are not, and insisting that you are amounts to treason against the rightful king." Duke Albrols insisted. Prince Kaisan slammed his fist on the desk. "Does Boscombe have the political influence to take the throne? The armies to hold it? No. Think carefully about who you are siding with, because you can't take it back once I leave this room." Prince Kaisan insisted. Duke Albrols remained silent as the prince stormed out of the office and returned to his suite within the palace. From the back of the room, a muscular man with long black hair stepped out of the shadows. "Kaisan is rapidly losing his mind, but the army is still loyal to him. Or the commanders are, anyhow. At this point, who knows who the enlisted men owe allegiance to? But what I do know is that the king of Skipple refused to send aid until the new king is declared. West Kyria is threatening to join the war on the Signia side if Kaisan takes the throne before the war is over, and Axbridge sent our envoy back in 17 pieces," he announced, speaking softly, but with authority. "Then what is our next move, Lord Boscombe?" Duke Albrols asked. "Let him lead his armies on a wild chase through the countryside for his intended bride. By the time that he realizes his mistake, I will be on the throne, and his head will be on a pike." Dominic was resting in bed with Princess Alexis, who was reading a fantasy novel, when the runners came in the next morning to give their reports. "We have news from the embedded scouts. The training camp is gone. The Signia army obliterated it last night with a combined air and ground strike. They are headed north up the river toward Staptondon, but the scouts report that there should be an entire train full of recruits that is almost to the camp." "What are your orders?" he asked. Dominic and Alexis smiled at each other. "No change of plans. We will disable the train and deal with the soldiers on board, then free any forcibly recruited peasants who do not wish to fight. A few more bodies for the upcoming peasant revolts. There is no camp for them to be trained at, so they would otherwise be redeployed. Once that is finished, I believe we are done here, and we can head toward another target." Alexis ordered. "Understood, Highness. Are we sending the whole regiment, or just a scout team to stop the train?" Alexis paused, then smiled. "Send a small scout team. Blow the tracks, disable the locomotive, mortar the officers' cars, then let the recruits follow their conscience. I suspect that Dagos is about to implode under the weight of decades of neglect." The team was sent out immediately so that they would have time to intercept the train from a suitable ambush point and escape largely undetected. So far, the Dagos army hadn't fully realized the extent of the activities in the area, but soon they would start to notice that everything was being destroyed, and it couldn't all be attributed to the Signia military force that had passed through. Soon, they would be attacking another target, and it would be clear that the actions of the Natural Sons were not the same unit. While they waited for the report, Dominic focused on repairing spare rifles with the new parts he was carrying, using the worn-out rifles from the siege as the base. This duty was closer to what they had expected the rifles to face, a few dozen shots once every few days. But Dominic wasn't going to risk them getting into another long battle without suitably reliable weapons. He was just finishing for the night when he noticed a change to his trade skill core. There was a single streak of blue, thin as a hair, along the front of the orb. The first signs of a journeyman level of skill. Soon, the trade skill knowledge locked inside and reserved for journeyman by Pops when he created it would unlock, and Dominic would learn a few new tricks of the forge. That may be a huge gain for him, but Dominic didn't know for certain what Pops had hidden for knowledge within the trade skill core. Each of them was individually made, and intended to impart all the knowledge that a journeyman should need. But when that knowledge released and what was deemed essential were both left up to the master who created the core. "Sir, we have the reports. Today's haul was better than expected," the messenger from the regiment reported just before dark. "I thought that they were going to hit the train and then retreat?" Dominic asked. "That was the plan. But when they hit the supply cart with a mortar, entire bags of mana cores spilled out. They sent in a strike team to recover them, and found 20 bags of Signia Army-marked mana cores, and 2 chests of essential skill gems in the supply cart of the derailed train. None of the gems are anything that we would need, but they brought them back to deny them to the enemy anyhow. No casualties or injuries on the strike team, but the casualties among the Dago's recruits were higher than expected. The plan to destroy the tracks met with a minor miscalculation, and the train continued another 500 meters along the rail bed before flipping and rolling down an embankment into the river. The messenger explained. Dominic sighed. He knew exactly what likely happened. They had targeted the track with explosives, and the train derailed, but momentum carried it in a straight line until something, likely an attack on the other train cars, upset the balance. Chapter 178. Low on storage. The skill and spell gems arrived moments later, along with the strike team, who had loaded themselves and their horses with supplies again. All of their storage items were full at this point, and they were carrying crates and bags on the mechanical horses. But they could give some supplies away as they traveled, earning goodwill from the civilians. Then they would restock from the next target they hit. Dominic took the boxes of gems and opened one to see what was actually in it. Spell gems of monstrous strength, spell gems of agility, and spell gems of sharpness. Literally, the most basic of spells that would be given to any common soldier to improve their basic physical attributes. Normally, they wouldn't even attempt to improve them with mana cores, they would just allow them to level up as they trained. By the time that they were through a 6-month training regimen, the spells would be at level 3, and they would be considered fit for duty as a city guard. Still, he recorded all 3 spells into the sorcerer's spellbook. More strength and agility were never a bad choice, and he did own a sword, so he might have use for sharpness one day. The second chest was the same as the first, and Dominic dropped the gems back into the box after checking them. The real treasures were the bags of mana cores. They weren't from monsters, they were the ones created by mages for the basic training of soldiers, equivalent to a level 1 or level 2 goblin core. Not individually impressive, but for recruits who had no base. It would help. They were also valuable to the soldiers here. Nobody had entry-level skills anymore, but you could drain the mana cores in combat instead of using your own mana. It wasn't considered a productive use of the items, but in an emergency, it was an option. Pass these out to the unit. There should be enough for everyone to have one, and then some spares. Bring what is left back to us for safekeeping. Dominic instructed. You don't need them for making munitions? The messenger asked. Dominic shook his head. I have thousands of rounds ready. I will have the regiment come and restock before we move. Just remind them that they need to keep space for their tents and camp equipment. We don't have extra vehicles to be loading down with gear that they should be carrying. That made the messenger chuckle. Not only did they not have extra vehicles, the ones that they did have were all overloaded and obviously of a foreign design, as the local steam trucks were a decade behind in their development. They could try to claim some of the damaged and discarded trucks from their future ambushes, but they would never be capable of keeping up with the regiment. The soldiers packed up everything that was non-essential before turning in for the night, and first thing in the morning after breakfast, they began sweeping the area of all signs that they had been camped for an extended stay. They were about to leave when Princess Alexis gathered the leadership to give last-minute instructions. I think that we have been going about this the wrong way. Signia already has soldiers in the region, and the military training camp is already gone. Forget having a good reason to be here. I believe that we're actually behind friendly battle lines at this point. Attacking Dago's deserters and civilians isn't our goal here, and it's not going to draw out the big fish that we need. So, I propose that we head northwest toward Aelwent. There is a keep there, and a city of nearly 50,000 without a wall. But the target isn't the city. We are going to set up on the road and become the most annoying highway bandits that Dagos has ever encountered. At first, we will head cross-country until we hit the highway near the coast. Then, find a good spot for ambushes and stop the Dagos army from moving soldiers east to intercept our forces who are taking Staptenden and Midgex. The destination is a few hundred kilometers north of the original plan, but if we push, we should be able to get there before the reinforcements sent from Albrols and the northern peninsula arrive. She explained. Why not set up near the port at Peichelshauen? That is where they'll be sending their reinforcements by sea. Plus, it's just fun to say, Commander Dax suggested. The men of the regiment chuckled, while the princess rolled her eyes. No matter how much fun it is to say, that's less than 300 kilometers from Staptenden down an improved road. The forces coming down it will be larger than we can deal with safely, and setting up far enough from the city to avoid retaliation puts us dangerously close to the patrol lines of our own airships. She explained. One of the scouts cleared his throat. If we're going to go harass Aelwent, the crossing at the Skiptondel River would be a good spot. It's heavily forested, the road runs through a valley as it crosses the river, and it's so far from any major target that they shouldn't expect us. We would have to eliminate the bandit control units that are sure to be set up along the valley. But that's not a big deal. The scout offered. Devious, I like it. The fact that it's a known ambush spot and rife with bandits anyhow really helps sell our disguise. Only when they start losing entire military regiments will they realize that something is wrong. And that should bring a proper response, perhaps even from the scumbag prince himself. With half of the east falling to our forces, he's going to have to do something to prove his leadership. Alexis agreed. Dominic committed the new plan to memory, and then gestured to a stack of mortars sitting along the side of the camp. Everyone grab 6 rounds. That should spread them evenly, and it's all we've got for now. As it turns out, giving everyone a mortar launcher requires an absolutely ridiculous amount of ammunition. He joked. The other officers he had given mortar creation orbs to gave him a sheepish look. That spell wasn't easy to activate, and only Dominic could make more than a few per minute. Don't worry, Lord Sorcerer. We will make every one of them count. Commander Dax assured him. It was hard not to, as effective as they were. Chapter 179, Desperate Times. The regiment was only 2 hours down the rutted dirt road when they came across the first village in desperate need of assistance. And these ones were truly desperate, Dominic decided, as they had tried to stop and rob the armed convoy with pitchforks. Even if they didn't all look half-starved, that would have been enough to let him know that they were hungry beyond the boundaries of common sense. So he rode forward and raised his hand for the regiment to lower their rifles. Sirs, madams, I can see that you're in dire need of assistance, and unable to help yourselves if you're starved enough to try your hand at robbing a group of bandits. How about this? I will give you a passing grade for effort, a fail for execution, and we will donate 2 cured hams and a sack of rolled oats to your village as a consolation prize. Dominic suggested. Where did you even get those? Nobody has good meat these days, unless they've got a hog sow left that the king's men haven't taken for themselves. An old man demanded. From the army, of course. They were kind enough to donate a whole convoy of goods to our cause, along with their lives. Dominic explained. The old man gave him a toothless smile. I don't suppose you can make it 2 sacks of rolled oats? We've still got 2 months before the potatoes start to come in. Behind Dominic's shoulder, Dax laughed at the man's brazen request. His 20 senior citizens were facing 500 rifles. but they still wanted to negotiate. Someone bring up 2 sacks of rolled oats and 2 hams from the supplies. Our tribute to these brave villagers, who definitely never saw us pass, and had those supplies saved, didn't they? Dominic replied. Seen who now? My eyesight isn't what it used to be. The old man agreed. The rifleman's supply sergeant handed over the supplies, and an old woman hugged him with tears in her eyes. It was touching, and Dominic noticed that someone discreetly removed a crate of canned military rations and left them beside the road for the locals to pick up when they were gone. The convoy started moving again, and saw more abandoned villages with every passing hour. Some recently, some years abandoned. But the drought had destroyed any chance of a decent crop everywhere that wasn't along a river, and even some of the riverbeds were dry. The further north they went, the more uninhabitable the land began to look, and even after half a day of travel, they didn't see any more signs of life among the scattered villages past the group of starving seniors. Should we search the houses to see if someone needs help? Commander Dax asked. Princess Alexis was about to answer, but Dominic shook his head.
No.
The men don't need to see what they are going to find inside those houses. If there is someone alive and in need of help, they will either make noise or come outside. Just have someone ride through the village. Dominic instructed. During his travels, he had seen enough villages depopulated by starvation or disease to know that even if you were desperate for shelter, it was a risk to your sanity going into any of the houses. Remind me again, why are we saving Dago's civilians? One of the officers asked. Common decency mostly, but also so that we have a safe retreat route if things go wrong. If the villagers are on our side, we don't have to worry about them turning us in to the authorities. Dominic explained. They camped along the abandoned road, not bothering to try to hide, as there was no sign of life within their scouting range for hours. Then, in the morning, they carried on only to find more of the same, but the ground was getting sandier as they approached the ocean, even more unsuitable for crops. So, it was with great relief when they made it to the highway, and the scouts encountered a small way station. Dominic rode ahead of the convoy, playing the part of Earl Nick of Totbu again, now that they had encountered people who might no more noblemen than their own lord. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Dominic greeted them with 6 mounted riflemen at his back. Good afternoon, my lord. The man replied, but his hands said something different. What is a wavemate's scion doing in Dagos? The keeper of the carriage stop sign discreetly. Dominic realized that he really needed to work on his disguise skills. Everyone seemed to recognize his lineage just by looking at his face, even with his horns covered. I don't suppose that there is a clean well in town? We could use a spot to wash up after a long ride. Dominic replied. Killing Dago's nobles for fun and profit, of course. Dominic signed back as he spoke. Ah, the well here isn't great. Too close to the ocean, the water is salty. But it will get the grime off, and it won't hurt the horses. Best of luck to you, my prince. There are soldiers headed east twice a day. If you have the men, you can hit them in the valley to the west. We will head down the road, then. Thank you for your help, Dominic replied, then turned and rode away, with a group of confused riders behind him. Once they were back at the regiment, the riders finally spoke up. What sort of conversation was that? You only asked him about the well, then left. How do we know that they're not going to turn us in to the next convoy to pass? He demanded. He was speaking Wavemate sign language or trade guild hand signals, as they're the same. He is on our side. According to the man at the station, there are military convoys twice a day down the highway, always headed east. That should be toward the battles in the cities. We might as well get in place and eliminate anyone left guarding the valley he spoke of before the next one comes along. It wouldn't do to have to engage them out in the open. Dominic explained. The map showed that there was a canyon that led to the river, and that would have to be the valley that they were looking for. There was only one major road in the area, and it was also the only bridge over the Foneven River anywhere near them. Princess Alexis motioned for them to send out teams, and Commander Dax began giving the orders to spread to either side of the road, so they could take both sides of the valley at once with minimal resistance. The trucks would stay on the south side so they didn't get trapped between the canyon and the ocean, but the regiment would have to split so that they could properly ambush anyone coming over the river. Chapter 180, Canyon Ambush Site. Dominic led the assault on the south side, while Commander Dax led the north side. The Dago's army had left one camp of guards in place on the east side of the river, at the entrance to the canyon, but there were only 10 men, all drunk, and none on guard duty when Dominic arrived. "Pistols are quieter," he whispered as the strike team spread out. None of the Dago's soldiers even saw their death coming. From across the canyon, Commander Dax signaled that they had also cleared the guards, and that they were settling in to wait for the next convoy to cross the river. "You know, I'm almost starting to feel bad for them at this point. They're stretched so thin, and the country is in so much worse shape than we thought. It feels like we're bullying them, not the other way around," Princess Alexis noted as they prepared to intercept the next convoy along the road, which was already coming into sight on the horizon. Dominic didn't reply right away, but as they watched the convoy cross the river, he couldn't help but agree with her assessment. A single soldier wearing a Dago's army coat was enough to assure the soldiers that all was well, and the convoy didn't even space themselves out for safety. Their steam trucks were overloaded, so they had chained them together, allowing the light ones at the front carrying nothing but their officers to pull the others up hills. Because an extended chain was just more failure points, they were nearly bumper to bumper when the mortars began to rain down on them, and the majority of the force never even made it out of the trucks. With the transports disabled, the riflemen launched volley after volley into the survivors, until nothing moved in the valley. "Good work, gentlemen. Send down a cleanup crew and have a pair of trucks hooked to the front to pull the scrap off the road. All rifles keep ready. There might be soldiers hiding in the vehicles," Princess Alexis ordered. The bodies of the Dago's vehicles were over 10 meters long and slender, looking more like a hybrid of a rail car and a carriage than the shorter, tractor-based vehicles that were more popular insignia. But that gave the passengers a better chance of survival when the vehicle was disabled by mortar fire. There were so many obstacles between a blast at the front and passengers in the back that there were chances for them to escape relatively unharmed. The bravest would have gone out to fight, but many might still be hiding in the wreckage, and destroying it any further would only make it harder to remove from the roadway. Their time was limited, so some risks would need to be taken, but the cleanup crew would have to be careful. "Come out with your hands raised, and we will let you leave. We're not interested in killing all of you and needing to bury the bodies," one of the cleanup crew called. After a few seconds, a group of soldiers in blood-stained uniforms kicked open the door of a truck and made a run for it, headed east up the hill. That wasn't the direction they came from, but the one that they were going. Why they thought that might be better was a mystery to Dominic, but from his vantage point he could see when they cleared the gorge and turned south, running inland. That was an even worse decision. Everyone in that direction had already starved to death, and the wells were mostly dry. But when more of the survivors joined them, the regiment simply let them run. Even if they turned back west at some point to cross the river, they wouldn't be able to tell anyone about the ambush for days, and there should be 2 more convoys tomorrow. The cleanup crew banged on the side of all the damaged trucks, and a few heavily wounded stragglers emerged at the windows, unable to leave under their own power. The cleanup crew took the time to find medical kits and either help them bandage their wounds or let them do it themselves, then gave them a pack and sent them on their way. The soldiers looked suspicious at the generosity until they saw that the regiment's trucks were towing everything away. This wasn't a simple robbery for food. They were being picked clean to arm a bandit group. The Dago's vehicles were pulled off the road after the bodies that had made it outside were loaded. There was still some destruction, but not as much as Dominic had expected, and everyone settled in to wait for the next convoy and loot this one, looking for anything worth taking. They would scrap and burn it when they left, but first they wanted to make sure that they had all the food, usable magitech, and other valuables out. The regiment was getting exceedingly efficient at the process, and when the scout whistle, the call of a great horned owl, which wasn't native to Dagos, alerted them to movement along the road, they were already finished. This second convoy was actually well guarded, and Dominic called for Princess Alexis to join them when he saw the fancy heraldry on the vehicles. "Is that someone important? Like, important enough not to hit his truck with a mortar?" Dominic whispered. Alexis sighed. "Yes, he's important enough not to hit with artillery." You really do need to learn all the livery symbols one day. That is the Viscount Boscombe. His army has nearly 100,000 men, and his home city numbers over 500,000. He's definitely important, even if he's not generally considered quite close enough to take the throne for himself. No, wait. Not counting the princes that we have in custody, and the ones we killed in the first phase of the war, Viscount Boscombe is the next in line for the throne if he wants it. We need him, or whoever is in that carriage, alive. Dominic sent the hand signal to the other side of the gorge, and everyone moved into position, ready to stop the convoy, which was surrounded by soldiers.